I only wore my father's jacket to feel safe, but the moment he saw it, he struck me in front of everyone. He thought he'd won. He didn't know the paper hidden in the pocket would destroy him forever. That night changed everything. Not because of the bruise on my cheek, but because of what I discovered tucked inside the worn leather lining. 20 years of lies, 20 years of theft, all exposed by a single document he never knew existed. My name is Rachel Harper, and I'm 32 years old. I've been a registered nurse at Riverbend Medical Center for 8 years now, working 12-hour shifts that leave my feet aching and my heart heavy. But it's honest work, and it keeps food on the table for my 11-year-old daughter, Emma. We've been on our own since the divorce 3 years ago, just the two of us against the world. Moving back to my mother's house in Brentwood, Oregon wasn't part of my life plan, but after David left, taking half our savings and leaving me with a mountain of debt, I didn't have many options. Mom welcomed us with open arms. Of course, she always does. It's her husband, Frank Morrison, who made it clear from day one that we were nothing but an inconvenience in his perfectly ordered life. Frank had married my mother 15 years ago, 2 years after Dad passed. At first, he seemed decent enough, a successful businessman who owned a logistics company, someone who could provide the stability Mom deserved after years of struggle. But once the wedding rings were exchanged, his true colors emerged like oil seeping through clear water. He ruled the house with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Every decision required his approval. Every penny spent needed his blessing. Even though I contributed $1,500 monthly for rent and groceries, more than my fair share, he never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was living under his roof, eating his food, using his electricity. The worst part wasn't his constant criticism or his degrading comments about single mothers who couldn't keep a man. It was the way he looked at Emma and me, like we were stray cats Mom had foolishly taken in. Temporary nuisances he was counting the days to be rid of. That December evening started like any other. I'd just finished a brutal shift at the hospital, dealing with 3 cardiac emergencies and a particularly difficult family who'd lost their father. My scrubs smelled like disinfectant and grief. All I wanted was to shower, hug my daughter, and maybe steal a few hours of sleep before the next shift. The house was cold when I got home. Frank always kept the thermostat at 62 degrees. Claiming anything higher was wasteful. I could hear him in his study, on another one of his important calls. Mom was in the kitchen, and Emma was upstairs doing homework. I headed to the coat closet, reaching for something warm. That's when I saw it. Dad's old leather jacket, tucked behind the winter coats. I hadn't worn it in months, too afraid of Frank's reaction. But tonight, exhausted and freezing, I didn't care. I needed to feel close to my father, needed that familiar smell of leather and his cologne that somehow still lingered after all these years. The jacket enveloped me like a hug from beyond. For a moment, I was 8 years old again, riding on Dad's shoulders at the county fair, both of us laughing at nothing and everything. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Frank's voice cut through my memories like a blade. He stood in the hallway, face flushed with the particular shade of red that meant trouble. "I'm cold," I said simply, pulling the jacket tighter. "Take it off." His voice was dangerously quiet. "You have no right to parade around in that man's clothes, disrespecting this household." "It's my father's jacket, Frank. I have every right." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. The crack echoed through the house like a gunshot. My cheek burned, tears springing to my eyes not from pain but from shock. In all his years of verbal abuse, he'd never raised a hand to me before. Mom gasped from the kitchen doorway. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her math textbook clutched to her chest, eyes wide with fear. "You forget your place," Frank snarled, straightening his cuffs as if he'd simply swatted a fly. "This is my house, my rules. That jacket belongs to a dead man who left nothing but debt and a broken family. You want to end up like him? Keep testing me." I stood there, cheek throbbing, staring at this man who'd just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The fear I'd carried for years crystallized into something harder, colder. This wasn't just about a slap. This was about Emma watching her mother be degraded. This was about Mom, too cowed to speak up. This was about years of being made to feel worthless in what should have been our sanctuary. I didn't remove the jacket. Instead, I straightened my spine, looked Frank directly in his cold gray eyes, and made a silent promise. This was the beginning of the end for Frank Morrison. He just didn't know it yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. My cheek had swollen slightly, a purple bruise blooming like a toxic flower. Emma had crawled into my bed around midnight, wrapping her small arms around me without saying a word. I held her close, feeling her heartbeat against mine, and promised myself she would never have to witness anything like that again. After Emma finally drifted off, I carefully extracted myself and went to the closet. Dad's jacket hung there, still carrying the warmth of our confrontation. I put it on again, needing its comfort, and sat on my bedroom floor in the darkness. As I ran my hands over the worn leather, remembering how Dad used to let me wear it when I was little, my fingers found something unusual. There was a slight bulge in the inner lining, near the left breast pocket. At first, I thought it was just the way the fabric had bunched over time, but when I pressed it, I felt something rectangular and firm. My nursing scissors were in my work bag. I retrieved them quietly, my hands trembling slightly as I carefully opened a small section of the lining. Inside was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age but still intact. My heart hammered as I extracted it. The envelope bore my name in Dad's distinctive handwriting, "For Rachel, only if needed." Inside were several documents. The first was a handwritten letter from Dad, dated just 2 months before his death. My eyes blurred with tears as I read his familiar script. "My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and things have likely become complicated. I pray your mother has found happiness, but I fear the wolves may be circling. The enclosed documents are your protection. Harper & Sons. Logistics is your birthright. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. The company was built by my father and me, and half of it belongs to you. I've made sure of it. Be strong. My girl. Love. Dad." Behind the letter was a notarized copy of his will, crystal clear in its language. 50% of all shares in Harper & Sons Logistics were to be held in trust for me until my 25th birthday, then transferred to my full control. The other 50% went to his business partner, who I now realized, with a shock that made my stomach turn, was Frank Morrison. My mind reeled. Frank had been Dad's business partner? He'd never mentioned it. Not once in 15 years. Mom had introduced him as someone she'd met at a grief support group, a widower who understood loss. But he'd known Dad, he'd worked with Dad, and he'd deliberately hidden this from all of us. The final document made my blood run cold. It was a business evaluation from just before Dad's death, showing Harper & Sons Logistics valued at over $12 million. My 50% stake would be worth at least $6 million today. Possibly more. I sat in the darkness, puzzle pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Frank's quick courtship of my mother, his insistence on managing all the family finances, the way he'd pushed me to sign papers when I turned 25, claiming they were for tax purposes, papers I'd trustingly signed without reading, overwhelmed as I was with a new baby and a failing marriage. My laptop was in my bag. I powered it on, muffling the startup sound with a pillow, and searched for Harper & Sons Logistics. The company website showed a thriving business with a fleet of over 200 trucks, contracts with major retailers, and 3 distribution centers across the Pacific Northwest. Frank was listed as CEO and sole owner. His son Tyler was operations director. There was no mention of my father, no mention of the Harper family at all. It was as if we'd been erased from existence. I found an old newspaper article from around the time of Dad's death. Local businessman dies in car accident, leaves behind wife and daughter. There was a quote from Frank Morrison, identified as Dad's business partner, praising him as a visionary who built something remarkable. He promised to take care of Tom's family as he would have wanted. Take care of us by stealing my inheritance, marrying my mother, and treating us like unwanted house guests in what was partially bought with my own money. My hands shook as I carefully returned everything to the envelope. This wasn't just theft. It was a calculated, long-term betrayal. Frank had seen an opportunity when Dad died and had executed a perfect crime: marry the widow, gain her trust, manipulate the daughter into signing away her rights, and walk away with a $12 million company. But he'd made one mistake. He'd assumed I'd never find these documents. He'd assumed that Jacket would be thrown away or forgotten. He'd assumed he could slap me into submission like he'd done with every other challenge to his authority. I looked at the bruise on my face in my phone's camera. That slap hadn't broken me. It had awakened me. Frank Morrison had no idea what he'd just set in motion. He'd stolen years of my life, my daughter's college fund, our security and future, but worse than that, he'd desecrated my father's memory and betrayed my mother's trust in the cruelest way possible. I slipped the envelope into my work bag, knowing I'd need to find a safer place for it tomorrow. As dawn broke through my bedroom window, I wasn't tired anymore. I was energized with purpose. Frank Morrison was about to learn what happened when you backed a Harper woman into a corner. He was about to discover that some inheritances were worth fighting for, and he was about to understand that the daughter he dismissed and slapped was her father's daughter in more ways than one. The game had begun. He just didn't know he was playing yet. The morning after discovering the documents, I stood in the kitchen making Emma's lunch, my face carefully covered with concealer. Frank sat at his usual spot at the breakfast table, reading the Financial Times as if he hadn't assaulted me 12 hours ago. Mom moved around him like a ghost, refilling his coffee without making eye contact. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, not looking at him. The words tasted like acid in my mouth. "About last night, I was tired and not thinking clearly." Frank lowered his newspaper, studying me with those calculating gray eyes. A small, satisfied smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Well," he said, folding the paper with precise movements, "perhaps you're finally learning. That jacket has no place in this house. I trust we won't have any more misunderstandings." "No," I agreed, forcing my voice to remain steady. "No more misunderstandings." Over the following weeks, I became the perfect house guest, quiet, compliant, invisible. I stopped arguing when Frank made his cutting remarks about single mothers. I nodded when he lectured about fiscal responsibility while wearing a watch worth more than my car. I even started leaving cash on the counter for extra utilities, which made him practically beam with satisfaction. "Finally showing some sense," he'd grunt, pocketing the money I could barely afford to give. Tyler, Frank's son, noticed the change. "Dad really put you in your place, huh?" He'd sneer when we crossed paths. "About time someone did." I'd lower my eyes and mumble agreement, all while memorizing every detail of his casual cruelty. Tyler Morrison, operations director of a company built on my father's sweat and dreams. I wondered if he knew the truth, or if he was just another beneficiary of his father's theft. The hardest part was maintaining the act around Mom. She'd look at me with such sad, worried eyes, occasionally touching my arm as if to say she understood, but she didn't. She couldn't. Not yet. 3 weeks into my performance, I approached Mom while Frank was at the office. I'd prepared my story carefully, knowing I needed her cooperation without raising suspicions. "Mom," I said, sitting beside her on the couch, "I've been thinking about Emma's future, about college funds and security. I want to set up some legal protections for her, just in case something happens to me." Mom's face clouded. "Oh, honey, don't talk like that." "I'm a single mom," I continued. "I see what happens to families without proper planning at the hospital all the time. I just need you to sign some papers giving me power of attorney over any inherited assets, so I can put them in trust for Emma." It wasn't entirely a lie. I did want to protect Emma's future, just not in the way Mom thought. "Frank handles all our legal matters," Mom said hesitantly. "This is just between us," I assured her. "Mother to mother, it won't affect anything with Frank. Please, Mom, for Emma." She signed the papers that afternoon, trusting me as she'd once trusted Frank. The irony wasn't lost on me. Meanwhile, I'd found my lawyer. Mark Dawson came recommended by a colleague at the hospital whose messy divorce he'd handled. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp brown eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for taking on powerful opponents. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, where Frank's network wouldn't spot us. I showed Mark the documents, watching his expression shift from professional interest to genuine anger as he read. "This is significant," he said finally. "Frank Morrison essentially stole a multi-million-dollar company. The will is clear. That 50% is yours. The question is proving he deliberately concealed it and manipulated you into signing away your rights. What do we need? Financial records, primarily, evidence of fraud, tax documents, anything showing he knew about your inheritance and actively worked to hide it." He leaned forward. "This won't be easy. Rachel, Frank Morrison is well connected. He'll have excellent lawyers." "I don't care," I said firmly. "He stole my father's legacy, my daughter's future. I want it back." Mark nodded slowly. "Then we need to be smart. Continue playing the submissive role. Let him think he's won. Meanwhile, I'll start filing preliminary paperwork and information requests. The element of surprise will be crucial." As we strategized, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Frank thought he'd broken me with that slap. Instead, he'd awakened a determination I'd inherited from my father, the same determination that had built Harper & Sons from nothing. That evening, I served Frank his dinner with a pleasant smile, refilled his wineglass with steady hands, and agreed with whatever pompous observation he made about the weakness of modern women. Tyler joined us, boasting about a new contract he'd secured, never knowing that the woman serving him pot roast was documenting every word about the company he'd helped steal. "You've been better lately," Frank observed, studying me over his wineglass. "More appropriate. Perhaps there's hope for you yet." "Thank you, Frank," I replied meekly. "I'm trying to learn my place." He nodded approvingly, completely missing the steel beneath my submissive facade. Frank Morrison, for all his cunning, had made the classic mistake of underestimating a woman he'd wronged. He saw what he wanted to see, a broken single mother who'd finally accepted her position. He couldn't see the storm gathering on his horizon. He couldn't see that every humble word, every downcast look, every moment of submission was another piece of the trap I was building around him. Soon, very soon, Frank Morrison would learn that some women didn't break, they just got smarter, and I was my father's daughter, after all. The cracks in the Morrison family foundation began to show during a tense Sunday dinner in late January. Tyler had been drinking more than usual. His face flushed as he gesticulated wildly with his fork. "Dad, we need to talk about the Westbrook contract," he slurred. "Marketing says we're underpricing by 30%. We're leaving money on the table." Frank's jaw tightened. "We've discussed this. The pricing structure is strategic. You wouldn't understand the bigger picture." "I understand plenty," Tyler shot back. "I understand that you make all the decisions while I do all the work. When do I get a real say in running my company?" "Your company?" Frank's voice was dangerously quiet. "Boy, you'd be working at a gas station if it wasn't for me." I served dessert silently, noting how Tyler's wife, Melissa, watched the exchange with barely concealed frustration. She'd been pushing Tyler to demand more control, more money. I'd overheard their arguments through the thin walls. Melissa wanted a bigger house, a vacation home, the lifestyle she felt a logistics empire should provide. The next day, I made my move. I accidentally left my laptop open on the kitchen counter while getting Emma's snacks, the screen displaying an article about succession planning and family businesses, as expected. Tyler noticed it when he came in for coffee. "Interesting reading," he commented sarcastically. "Oh." I quickly closed the laptop, feigning embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I was just curious about business structures. Your father mentioned once that Harper & Sons was originally a partnership. I wondered how those usually work out." Tyler's eyes sharpened. "Partnership? Dad never mentioned any partner." I shrugged, playing dumb. I must have misheard. He probably meant something else. But the seed was planted. I watched Tyler leave with a thoughtful expression, knowing he'd be digging into company history. What he'd find would raise questions Frank wouldn't want to answer. A week later, Mark called with interesting news. My investigator found something. Frank's been moving money through shell companies. Nothing obviously illegal, but definitely suspicious. And get this, there's a pattern of large transfers right around the time your father died. How large? Nearly $3 million. Moved offshore within 6 months of your father's death. Could be legitimate business. Could be asset hiding. We need more. That evening, Tyler cornered Frank in his study. I could hear their raised voices from the kitchen. "Who was Tom Harper?" Tyler demanded. "And don't tell me he was nobody. I found old incorporation documents. He owned 50% of the company." "Ancient history," Frank replied coldly. "Harper died. I bought out his shares from the estate. Everything was handled properly." "Then why isn't there any record of the sale? Why did you tell me you founded the company alone?" "Because I did build it alone," Frank exploded. "Harper was dead weight, a dreamer with no business sense. I made this company what it is." I slipped into the hallway, pretending to head for the bathroom, but actually positioning myself where Tyler would see me. When he stormed out of the study, I made sure to flinch, letting him see fear in my eyes. Not of him, but of his father. "You okay?" Tyler asked, surprisingly. "Fine," I whispered. I try to stay out of the way when Frank's upset." Tyler studied me for a moment, perhaps remembering the bruise I'd worn for a week. "Yeah," he said slowly, "Dad can be intense." Over the following days, I carefully orchestrated more doubts. A printed email about inheritance tax strategies left where Melissa would find it. An overheard phone conversation where I mentioned power of attorney and protecting assets. Each breadcrumb led Tyler and Melissa to the same conclusion. Frank was hiding something big. The real breakthrough came when Melissa, frustrated by Frank's refusal to discuss increasing their household budget, decided to do her own investigation. She had access to Tyler's office computer and, by extension, certain company files. I was doing laundry when she confronted Tyler in their bedroom upstairs, her voice carrying through the vents. $3 million, Tyler. Your father withdrew $3 million in consultation fees the year Tom Harper died. And look at this. Harper had a daughter, Rachel, your stepsister, Rachel." The silence that followed was deafening. I heard Tyler's heavy footsteps on the stairs, then in the kitchen. He found me washing dishes, and for a long moment, we just stared at each other. "You knew," he said finally. It wasn't a question. I dried my hands slowly, choosing my words carefully. "I found out recently some old papers in my father's things." "And you didn't say anything?" "Would you have?" I asked quietly. "Your father made it very clear what happens when someone challenges him." I touched my cheek unconsciously, and Tyler's eyes followed the gesture. He left without another word, but I knew the fuse was lit. Tyler Morrison had inherited his father's ambition and greed. The thought that Frank might have cheated not just my father, but potentially him out of millions, would eat at him like acid. That night, the Morrison family dinner was a minefield of unspoken accusations. Frank sensed the shift, his eyes moving between Tyler and Melissa with growing suspicion. "Something on your mind, son?" he asked, cutting his steak with precise movements. "Just thinking about the company's future," Tyler replied. "About transparency, succession planning, making sure everything's above board." Frank's knife paused mid-cut. "Everything in my company is above board." "Your company," Tyler repeated softly. "Right." The tension was so thick you could cut it with Frank's steak knife. Mom looked confused. Emma wisely stayed quiet, and I served vegetables as if nothing was happening. But underneath the table, my hands were steady. The chess pieces were moving exactly where I wanted them. Frank Morrison had built his empire on a foundation of lies and theft. Now his own son was beginning to pull at the threads. And I hadn't even played my strongest cards yet. The Marion County Courthouse stood like a fortress of justice against the gray February sky. I climbed the stone steps with Mark beside me, my father's will and the power of attorney documents secure in his briefcase. After weeks of careful preparation, we were firing the first legal shot. "Remember," Mark murmured as we entered the building, "today is just about establishing standing. We file the petition, get the court to recognize your claim, and force Frank to respond. Stay calm, no matter what happens." The clerk's office was bustling with lawyers and paralegals. Mark handed over our carefully prepared petition, a formal request for the court to recognize my inheritance rights and freeze any transfers of company assets until the matter could be resolved. Within 3 days, Frank would be served. The thought made my stomach flutter with equal parts anxiety and anticipation. That evening, I maintained my usual routine, serving dinner as if I hadn't just lit a legal fuse under Frank's empire. He was in particularly good spirits, having closed a major deal that afternoon. "Tyler finally showed some backbone in negotiations," he boasted to Mom. "Maybe the boy's learning something after all." Tyler's smile was tight. Since discovering the truth about my father, he'd been different, quieter, watchful, like a predator studying prey. Melissa barely touched her food, her designer nails tapping against her wine glass in an anxious rhythm. The process server arrived 3 days later at 7:47 a.m., just as Frank was leaving for work. I watched from the kitchen window as the man in a plain suit approached Frank's Mercedes. "Frank Morrison?" "What's this about?" Frank demanded, his coffee mug steaming in the cold morning air. "You've been served, sir. Have a good day." The explosion came faster than I'd expected. Frank burst back into the house, his face purple with rage, the legal documents crumpled in his fist. "You conniving little bitch!" he roared. Finding me in the kitchen, Mom gasped, dropping her teacup. "You think you can steal from me? From me?" I stood my ground, meeting his fury with calm determination. "I'm not stealing anything. Frank, I'm claiming what my father left me, what you've hidden for 15 years. "I'll bury you," he snarled. "I'll crush you in court. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," I said quietly, "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A man who seduced a grieving widow to steal her late husband's company." The slap never came. Though his hand twitched, Tyler had appeared in the doorway, watching. Frank's rage pivoted to calculation. "Get out," he said coldly. "You and your brat, pack your things and get out of my house. Today." "Frank!" Mom protested weakly. "Shut up, Carol. Your daughter just declared war. She can fight it from the streets." I'd anticipated this. Mark had warned me Frank would likely retaliate with eviction. I'd already secured a small apartment and moved our essential belongings, but I played the part, letting tears fill my eyes. "Please, Frank, Emma's in school. We have nowhere to go." "Should have thought of that before you bit the hand that feeds you," he sneered. 2 hours, then I call the police." As I packed our remaining things, Tyler appeared in my doorway. "He's calling Caldwell and Barnes," he said quietly. "They're the best law firm in the state. Dad keeps them on retainer." "I know," I replied, folding Emma's clothes. "You can't win this. Rachel, he'll destroy you." I paused, looking at my stepbrother. "Your father already tried to destroy me." "Tyler." He failed. The first hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Frank's legal team filed a motion to dismiss, claiming the will was invalid, that I'd waited too long to make a claim, that I'd willingly signed away any rights. They painted me as a gold digger trying to cash in on ancient history. Mark was brilliant in response. He'd uncovered a paper trail showing Frank had actively concealed the will's existence. Email records, subpoenaed from the company servers, showed Frank instructing his accountants to bury the Harper name and eliminate any partnership references. But the bombshell came when Mark presented evidence of the shell companies. "Your Honor," Mark addressed Judge Patricia Weinstein, a stern woman with sharp eyes. "We have evidence that Mr. Morrison moved $3 million out of Harper & Sons immediately following Thomas Harper's death." These funds were transferred through a series of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. We believe this represents the liquidation of Mr. Harper's share of the company, funds that rightfully belong to his daughter. The courtroom erupted. Frank's lead attorney, a silver-haired shark named Richard Caldwell, objected vehemently. "These are baseless accusations. Mr. Morrison built that company through his own efforts." "Then he won't mind opening his books for forensic accounting," Mark countered smoothly. Judge Weinstein's gavel cracked. "Enough. Mr. Morrison, you have 2 weeks to provide full financial records dating back to the time of Mr. Harper's death. Additionally, I'm granting a temporary injunction freezing any transfers of company assets until this matter is resolved." Frank's face was stone as we left the courthouse, but I caught the flash of something in his eyes, for the first time. Franklin Morrison looked worried. Outside, Mark was jubilant. "Did you see Caldwell's face when we mentioned the Cayman accounts? They didn't know we had that." "This is just the beginning," I reminded him, though I felt a surge of hope. "Frank won't go down easily." "No," Mark agreed, "but he's going down." The judge saw through their bluster. Truth has a way of doing that. As we drove away, I thought about my father. Somewhere, I hoped he knew that his daughter was fighting, that the legacy he'd built wouldn't be stolen without consequences. The war was far from over, but I'd won the first battle, and Frank Morrison was about to learn that some debts always come due. The forensic accounting report was damning. Mark spread the documents across his conference table, his expression grave but satisfied. "Rachel, Frank Morrison didn't just steal your inheritance. He's been defrauding the IRS for over a decade." My hands trembled as I reviewed the numbers. Falsified depreciation schedules, phantom employees, over $4 million in unreported income. Frank had been skimming from Harper & Sons while simultaneously cooking the books to avoid taxes. "We need to be strategic about this," Mark advised. "This is no longer just a civil matter. If we report this to the IRS—" "We report it," I said firmly. "But not yet. First, we use it." My next meeting was with 3 minority shareholders in Harper & Sons, old-timers who'd invested when my father was alive. I'd tracked them down through archived records, and they agreed to meet at a quiet restaurant downtown. "Gentlemen," I began, sliding folders across the table, "what I'm about to show you affects your investments directly." Carl Hendricks, who owned 8% of the company, whistled low as he read. "Frank told us revenues were down, said we were barely breaking even, while paying himself a $2 million salary," I added, "and hiding another $1 million offshore annually." "That son of a bitch," muttered James Wong, another shareholder. "We trusted him with Tom's company." "You knew my father?" Carl's weathered face softened. "Tom Harper was the most honest man I ever did business with. When he died, Frank swore he'd run things just like Tom would have wanted." He laughed bitterly. "We were fools." "Help me make it right," I said simply. "Support my claim to the board. Vote no confidence in Frank's leadership." The 3 men exchanged glances. "What do you need?" James asked. Within days, the shareholders formally requested an emergency board meeting. Frank couldn't refuse. Together, they controlled 22% of the company. Combined with my claimed 50%, we theoretically had majority control. Frank's counterattack was swift and vicious. A private investigator started following me. My apartment manager received anonymous complaints. Even Emma's school got calls questioning my fitness as a mother. "He's trying to build a character assassination case," Mark warned. "Stay squeaky clean. No parking tickets, no jaywalking, nothing he can use." But I had my own weapons. I met with IRS Criminal Investigation Division agent Patricia Chen at Mark's office. She reviewed our evidence with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. "This is extensive tax fraud," she confirmed. "We'll need to verify independently, but if even half of this is accurate, Mr. Morrison is looking at federal charges." "I don't want him in jail," I said, surprising both her and Mark. "I want him to lose everything he stole, pay what he owes, and walk away with nothing. Can we make that deal?" Agent Chen studied me. That would depend on his cooperation. And yours? The emergency board meeting was scheduled for March 15th. Frank used every delay tactic possible, but the shareholders held firm. The night before, Tyler appeared at my apartment. "He knows about the IRS," Tyler said without preamble. "His lawyer found out somehow. Dad's—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Dad's considering fleeing the country." "With what money? The accounts are frozen." "He has cash, more than you know." Tyler looked exhausted, older than his 35 years. "I didn't know. Rachel, about your father? About any of it. I thought Dad built everything himself." "And now?" "Now I know I've been an accomplice to theft." His voice was bitter. "Everything I have, everything I've built my life on, is stolen from you." I studied my stepbrother. "You could help make it right?" "How?" "Testify. Tell the board what you know. Support the no confidence vote." Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "Melissa's pregnant," he said finally. "What happens to us if I turn against him?" "You'll still have a job if you're honest," I promised. "Harper & Sons needs experienced leadership, just not Frank's kind." The boardroom at Harper & Sons headquarters had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Columbia River. I entered wearing my best suit, the one I'd bought for job interviews after my divorce. Frank sat at the head of the table, flanked by his lawyers. He looked older, grayer, the past weeks having carved deep lines in his face. "This is a farce," he began, but Carl Hendricks cut him off. "No, Frank, the farce is what you've been selling us for 15 years. He turned to the board. "I call for a vote of no confidence in CEO Frank Morrison." What followed was a systematic destruction of Frank's credibility. Mark presented the forensic accounting. The shareholders testified about years of being lied to about company performance. Then Tyler stood. "My name is Tyler Morrison," he began, his voice shaking, "and I need to tell the truth about my father's management of this company." Frank's face went white. "Tyler, sit down." "No, Dad, I'm done being your puppet." Tyler pulled out a flash drive. "This contains records of every under-the-table deal, every bribe, every falsified report I was ordered to create or sign. I'm prepared to cooperate fully with authorities." The vote was unanimous. Frank Morrison was removed as CEO, effective immediately. But the killing blow came from Agent Chen, who entered as the vote concluded. "Mr. Morrison, I'm with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We need to discuss your options." Frank's legendary composure finally cracked. He looked at me with pure hatred. "You destroyed everything." "No, Frank," I replied calmly. "You destroyed everything the day you decided to steal from a dead man's daughter. I just brought receipts." Security escorted him out, from the building his theft had built, from the office where my father's photo once hung, from the life he'd constructed on a foundation of lies. The board turned to me. "Ms. Harper," Carl said gently, "your father would be proud. What's your first act as majority shareholder?" I looked around the room, at Tyler, who'd chosen truth over blood, at the shareholders who'd trusted my father's memory, at Mark, who'd fought alongside me. "First," I said, my voice strong and clear, "we restore the Harper name to this company. Harper & Sons Logistics rises again." The emergency board meeting reconvened after a brief recess. Frank had been escorted out, but his presence lingered like smoke in the air. The remaining board members, longtime employees and investors who'd weathered Frank's regime, looked to me expectantly. I stood at the head of the table, my father's rightful place, and felt the weight of 15 stolen years pressing down on my shoulders, but I also felt his strength flowing through me. "Gentlemen, ladies," I began, my voice carrying the authority I'd inherited by blood and earned through battle. "Frank Morrison is gone, but his poison runs deep in this company. Today, we begin the cure." Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Despite his crucial testimony, he remained Frank's son, tainted by association, complicit through silence. The board knew it. He knew it. "Tyler Morrison," I addressed him directly, "you showed courage today, But courage alone doesn't erase years of participation in fraud. His jaw tightened. I understand. I'll clean out my office. No, the word surprised everyone, including me. You'll stay, but not as operations director. You'll work under supervision. Help us unravel every fraudulent scheme, every hidden account. Consider it community service. Relief flickered across his face before he composed himself. Yes, ma'am. I turned to the wider board. Harper & Sons Logistics was built on trust and integrity. We return to those values today. Every contract obtained through bribery will be terminated. Every falsified record will be corrected. Every stolen dollar will be accounted for. That could cost millions, one board member warned. Better to lose millions than our souls, I replied. My father used to say that business without honor is just theft with paperwork. Frank proved him right. The meeting continued for 3 more hours. We established a transition team, appointed an interim CEO from within the company ranks, and scheduled a full audit. But as papers were signed and hands were shaken, I had one more piece of business. There's something else, I announced as members prepared to leave. Frank Morrison didn't just steal from this company. He stole from the woman who trusted him with her heart. My mother, Carol Morrison, deserves to know the truth. That evening, I sat with Mom in my small apartment. Emma was at a friend's house. I'd wanted her away from this revelation. Mom's hands shook as she read the documents Mark had prepared, tears streaming down her face. 15 years, she whispered. 15 years of lies. He told me he loved me. He told me he'd take care of us. He targeted you, Mom. You were grieving, vulnerable. He saw an opportunity. I brought him into our lives. I let him. Her voice broke. I let him treat you like dirt. I watched him diminish you, control you. And I said nothing because I was afraid of being alone again. I took her hands. You were a victim too, but we're not victims anymore. The next morning, Frank made his last stand. He arrived at what had been his home with a police escort to collect belongings, only to find Mom had changed the locks. His personal items were boxed on the porch. Carol, he bellowed, this is my house. I paid for everything. Mom appeared in the doorway, transformed. The meek woman who'd tiptoed around his moods was gone. In her place stood someone who'd found her spine. With stolen money, she said clearly, money that belonged to my daughter, my husband's legacy that you perverted into your personal piggy bank. You're nothing without me, Frank snarled. Just another pathetic widow who survived, Mom interrupted. Who raised a daughter strong enough to bring down your empire of lies. Get off my property. Frank, or would you prefer to discuss this with my divorce attorney? As his escort led him away, Frank turned for one last shot at me. You think you've won? I'll be back. I'll fight every charge, every claim. I'll make your life hell. I stepped beside my mother, our shoulders touching, drawing strength from each other. You already tried that, Frank, for 15 years. You tried to break us. But here's what you never understood about the Harper women. We're steel wrapped in silk. You saw the silk and missed the steel. This isn't over, he threatened. Yes, I said simply. It is. And it was. Frank's lawyers would file appeals. Certainly. The IRS would pursue their case. The divorce would be messy. But the war was won. Harper & Sons Logistics was returned to its rightful heirs. The man who'd built his kingdom on a dead man's foundation had watched it crumble in a single afternoon. As Frank's car disappeared down the street, Mom and I stood together on the porch of the house he'd ruled like a tyrant. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of justice, gold and crimson, like truth finally breaking through. Your father would be so proud, Mom said softly. I thought about Dad, his leather jacket still hanging in my closet, his dreams finally reclaimed, his family finally free. He knew this day would come. That's why he hid those papers. He knew someday we'd need them. A message from beyond, Mom murmured. One last gift. The greatest gift, I agreed. The truth. Inside the house, we began boxing up Frank's remaining traces, his awards, his photos, his pretensions of grandeur. Each item removed felt like chains falling away. By nightfall, the house would be ours again, clean, free, ready for whatever came next. The revolution was complete. The tyrant had fallen, and the Harper women stood victorious in the rubble of his deceit, ready to build something better on foundations of truth. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated executive office of Harper & Sons Logistics, looking out at the same Columbia River view that Frank had once commanded. But unlike him, I didn't see territory to dominate. I saw possibility. The company had survived the transition better than anyone expected. Yes, we'd lost some contracts that were built on bribes. Yes, the IRS settlements had cost us nearly $2 million, but what remained was honest, profitable, and growing. Our drivers respected management again. Our clients trusted our word. The Harper name meant something once more. Tyler knocked on my door. "Rachel?" The quarterly reports. He'd accepted his demotion with grace, working tirelessly to prove his commitment to the new regime. His wife Melissa had divorced him during the scandal, taking half of his assets, but he'd found something more valuable in the process: integrity. "Profits are up 12%, he reported, and the employee satisfaction survey came back, highest ratings in company history. "My father always said happy employees build strong companies," I replied. Frank never understood that. Speaking of Frank, Tyler hesitated. He took the plea deal, 5 years probation, full restitution, and he's barred from any executive position in any company. He's working as a logistics consultant in Portland. Small clients only. I felt no satisfaction in Frank's fall, only relief. He'd lost everything he'd built on lies, left with only what he could earn honestly. It was justice, not revenge. That evening, I came home to find Mom teaching Emma how to make Dad's famous spaghetti sauce. The kitchen filled with laughter and the scent of basil, sounds and smells that had been forbidden under Frank's regime of control and criticism. "Mom, tell me again about Grandpa Tom," Emma requested, stirring the pot carefully. "Well," Mom began, her eyes bright with happy memories instead of tears, "your grandfather was the kind of man who'd give you his last dollar if you needed it. He built his business on handshakes and kept promises." I leaned against the doorway, watching my daughter absorb these stories of the grandfather she'd never met, but whose legacy she'd inherit. Not just money or a company, but values, integrity, the courage to stand up to bullies, the wisdom to hide truth where it could be found when needed. My phone buzzed. Mark's text read, "Final settlement approved. $6.2 million recovered, plus the house. Congratulations, Rachel." $6.2 million. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like recovery, getting back what was always ours, minus 15 years of compound interest on dreams deferred and dignity destroyed. But money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was Mom's laughter, Emma's confidence, Tyler's redemption, the 100 employees who still had jobs because we'd chosen honesty over Frank's schemes. After dinner, I walked out to my car, needing a moment alone. In the garage sat a new addition, a vintage 1967 Mustang, the same model Dad had always dreamed of restoring. I'd bought it with my first legitimate CEO bonus, planning to restore it with Emma, teaching her like Dad would have taught me, if he'd lived. I still wore his leather jacket on cold nights, but now it wasn't armor against abuse or a shield against cruel words. It was just a comfortable reminder of where I came from and where I was going. My phone rang, an unknown number, but I recognized the voice immediately. "Rachel." Frank's voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "I'm calling to—" I wanted to say. I waded through his struggle, feeling no need to help him find words. "I'm sorry," he finally managed. "For all of it. For stealing from you. For the way I treated you and Emma. For betraying your mother's trust. I'm sorry." The apology hung between us like a bridge I had no intention of crossing. "I hope you find peace, Frank," I said simply, and ended the call. Later that night, as Emma slept and Mom watched her evening shows, I sat in Dad's jacket and wrote in my journal. Today marks 6 months since we reclaimed our legacy. Not just money or property, but dignity, self-respect, the right to live without fear in our own home. Frank thought he'd broken us with that slap, but he only broke the chains he'd wrapped around us. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but this wasn't revenge. It was justice served with precision. Frank created his own downfall the day he decided to build an empire on stolen foundations. Dad, if you can see us now, I hope you're proud. Your company thrives with honor. Your wife smiles again. Your granddaughter walks tall. And your daughter? She learned that sometimes the best response to a slap isn't to hit back. It's to take everything the person values and return it to its rightful owners. The leather jacket hangs in my office now, behind the door, a reminder that true inheritance isn't always about money. Sometimes it's about the courage to fight for what's right, hidden in the lining, waiting for the moment when we're ready to claim it. The Harper women don't break, we rise. I closed the journal and looked out at the stars. Somewhere up there, I like to think Dad was smiling. The nightmare that began with violence in a cold kitchen had ended with justice in a warm boardroom. The jacket that triggered Frank's rage had contained the seeds of his destruction. And me? I was no longer the frightened single mother serving dinner to a tyrant. I was Rachel Harper, CEO, mother, daughter, keeper of my father's true legacy. The slap that was meant to break me had instead broken my chains. And that was the sweetest justice of all. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this story, and I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to keep you down? Share your experiences below.